Hello goons and gals, it's Doug here with the Born a Goon channel, and I'm here to give you your healthy heaping handful of Supermoto content. So I hope you are prepared, my #Sumo soldiers. So on that note, I'd like to welcome you to today's video that will be titled Supermoto. It's a different world, to build or not to build. So last week I did a video on Supermotos, and a big piece of that video was me discussing and sort of curmudgeoning about the lack of manufacturer participation in the Supermoto space, and that most Supermotos that you're seeing on the streets today are not factory pre-built Supermotos, they're actually converted Supermotos from another motorcycle platform. I also went on to talk about my confusion as to why we don't see more manufacturer participation, why we don't have a solid American-based racing series, and because they're such fun and probably the funnest motorcycle of all of them to own, why are we not seeing more of these on the road? Now, what took me by surprise was the Supermoto enthusiasts who began to fill up my comments section with their war stories of how they built and raced and was riding their Supermotos. It was like these Supermoto builds were a badge of honor. And it got me thinking how unique the Supermoto crowd is, and that every Supermoto that you see out there has a deep-rooted backstory. And perhaps the real thrill of owning a Supermoto next to actually riding it is giving it your own personal touch, as if you created this piece of art. So without me sounding too philosophical here, I came to the conclusion that Supermoto is not something that you just ride, but it's also a way of life. There are a lot of YouTube videos out there that have been done about the pre-built Supermotos that are available to the public, but not many videos are out there that talk about the greatest platforms to start building your own Supermoto if you can't afford to buy one that's already pre-built. So for many of you out there who are interested in owning a Supermoto, there could be a lot cheaper Supermoto platforms that you can start out with. And who knows, maybe you already own one of these platforms and it's just sitting in your garage collecting dust, or maybe your neighbor has one for sale on the cheap. And you could easily convert this into a Supermoto and be on the road to major goonness in no time. So in this video, we'll discuss, is it a better idea to go out and purchase a pre-built Supermoto from the factory, which right now you have limited options, or is it better to build your own work of art from the ground up? And if so, how much is that going to cost? Now, before we start, let's talk a little bit about this term Supermoto in case you're relatively new to this genre of motorcycling. When we say Supermoto, and at least when I say Supermoto for the purpose of this video, I want to stick with the true essence of what a Supermoto really is. So if we can take a quick backstory into the history of this sport and genre, Supermoto was created in the late 70s as an experiment to prove what kind of moto discipline would be the best. Is it a superbiker, a motocrosser, or a dirt tracker? Much like the UFC was trying to do in the mid-90s when they were trying to find out what is the best fighting discipline. Now, since then, both of the sports have gone on to morph into their own style altogether, but that's a completely different topic. Now, to make a long story short, in order to be competitive in the sport of Supermoto on both street and dirt, since a bike at that time had not been built by any factory and did not exist, you needed to have a motorcycle that had a chassis that could handle both street and dirt. Since the street sections of Supermoto were tight and short, big board CC bikes were just overkill and would be totally unmanageable on the dirt. And on the other hand, dirt bikes with just knobby tires were crap on asphalt. Solution? Put a street tire on a dirt bike, and thus Supermoto is born. Now, there's obviously a lot more to it than just that, but you get the gist for the sake of time. Because that's the type of motorcycle that I feel is the essence of Supermoto, that's the one I want to focus my discussion on today, is bikes that fit within that category. Now, that kind of leaves out this gray area of what the world today kind of thinks Supermotos might be, whether they call them Supermotos, Supermotards, or whatever the lingo is. But it leaves out things that I feel are too big and bulky and don't define that true essence, such as the Ducati Hyper Motard, the Urban Motards, or converted scramblers. Now, while these are awesome bikes, no doubt, you can definitely get the business done and have a ton of giggly fun on these, for what we're talking about today, I just feel that they are too big to define what Supermoto is, and that's why you don't really see any of these on Supermoto tracks, and, well, that's what I'm going with today. So we'll just start out talking about what is actually available out there that's pre-built from the factory that you can walk into a dealership, plop down your money, and just take off into straight hooliganness. Now there's not a lot that's out there, but it's no doubt that KTM currently rules this space by producing the king of all supermotos, the 690R. And that bike is manufactured, or marketed I should say, under 3 different brands. It's the KTM 690, it's the Husky 701, and now we have the Gas 700. The KTMs are the most up-to-date, technologically advanced supermotos that are available with premium components on them. It's a 74 horsepower single-cylinder thumper that's so quick it will disappear into the distance as fast as a Twinkie at a Weight Watchers meeting, and it's just slightly heavier than the Olsen twins, coming in at 324 pounds or 146 kilograms. And it's definitely an eye-catcher. But it's also very expensive at a starting price at roughly $12,000 to $12,500 United States dollars. Now that's not counting fees that go on top of that. So you would be lucky to actually get out of the dealership for less than $15,000. The other thing with this bike is KTM purposely keeps the inventory low on that to create a high demand for this bike. And because of this, the demand is also very high in the used market. If you look around, you'll see that many late model 690s and 701s have over 10,000 miles on them and are still selling for $11,000 plus. But in my opinion, if you're looking for the very best street legal supermoto that the world has to offer, this is it right here. Another great pre-built supermoto that's still available is the Suzuki DRZ 400. And the DRZ 400 hasn't changed a bit practically in 20 years, but it hasn't had to, because the DRZ is a cult classic when it comes to supermoto. And that's because of its easy to use power and its harder to kill than Rambo engine is what makes this bike such a winner. Although I find it now that it's touching $7,500 plus fees brand new, it's starting to get a little steep for the old warrior. Now, luckily though, if you dig around the used market, you can still find a good DRZ for around $4,000 to $5,000 that may even have some modifications on it. I wouldn't worry too much about the mileage or the age, since the bike hasn't changed since boy bands were popular. And when it comes to the DRZ 400 Supermoto, it's just a bike that gets along with a lot of different riders, and that's what makes it a winner. You also have the relatively new Kawasaki KLX 300 Supermoto, which retails at around $6,300 United States dollars. In this current environment, I find this to be a great value under the circumstances. Kawasaki's are just as bomb-proof, reliable machines as Suzuki or any other Japanese manufacturer, so that's something that you don't have to worry about. On paper, this tiny little KLX seems to be a baby-sized bike, but spec sheets don't have a metric for the fun factor. For most riders, this little KLX will have plenty of usable, non-intimidating power, and it's gonna fit into that moto slogan of I'd rather ride a slow bike fast than a fast bike slow. Now, while you will not own the fastest nor the sexiest supermoto that's ever been built, there will be this priceless pleasure that you will get when you block past a $17,000 plus sport bike on your local twisty canyon roads while you proceed to wheelie away from them on your $6,000 300cc Kawasaki. Then later on, when you meet up at the cafe atop the hill and they ask you, hey, what gear were you in when you passed me? And you can say, all of them, and then ride off. You also have the SWM 500, which was a popular mention in the comments section of my last video. The full backstory of SWM is too lengthy for this video, but the short of it is, or at least from what I have gathered, and if I'm wrong, I apologize, is that when KTM bought their rights to Husqvarna, they abandoned this SWM brand, which was a side deal of Husqvarna, and left this empty warehouse of SWM bikes laying around. Now from there, apparently a Chinese investor steps in, and we have what we have today. Now apparently this bike uses the old TE510 chassis from the Husqvarna. So based on that premises alone, the chassis and handling of this bike should be sharp. Now I've ridden the TE510 many moons ago, and it was legit. As far as the engine is concerned, I'm sorry, but I didn't research it enough to know how much of it is Chinese and how much of it is old Husky parts. I will probably end up doing some more research because I'm intrigued about this bike and do a full video on it, but that's what I have for you now. I only say this because my only concern about owning a bike like this would be its reliability. And not so much maybe its reliability, but if something small does happen, which does from time to time on all motorcycles, can you access replacement parts and how easy are they to get them, especially since we're all still dealing with supply chain crunches? However, from what I gather, I haven't found a whole lot of negative talk about this bike, and that's great. And I do know that the old Husqvarna TE510 was solid, so I would trust this bike. And at $8,200 for a 500cc pre-built Supermoto is hands down the best value that you will find anywhere. You also have the Electric Zero FX, and I'm sorry, but I was jokingly harsh about this bike in my last video. If truth be told, I actually think it's a cool looking bike, and I'm all for this electric revolution, and I believe that's our future. And when it comes to the Zero, the electric motor on this bike punches out a ridiculous amount of torque. But the problem that we're still having with electric motorcycles is battery life and charging time. Even though this is our future, the technology just hasn't caught up yet. And also the price is still very steep. Even though you probably can qualify for some sort of government kickbacks and credits, it's still quite high. And while I wouldn't consider this other than a second Supermoto as a play bike or a test bike or an experimental bike, I do hope we get more development with electronic motorcycles over the next 5 years. Now, there are a few competition-only Supermotos that are available that you can buy from the factory. And again, who else would rule this space other than KTM, and bless them for keeping the sumo blood alive. You have the KTM 450 SMR, the Husky 450, and these are just downright wicked, fast, purpose-built race bikes. And unless you're going to trailer your bike to a track and ride it there, or you have a friend at the DMV that somehow can get this thing plated, or you're just going to flat out break the law and ride illegally, which I'm not here to condone or discourage. I'm just simply saying this bike doesn't fit a whole lot of people, but it is badass, so I put it on the list. Now, you do have some pre-built Supermotos that you might be able to find used. And one that comes to memory first is the Aprilia XXV 550 and 450s. Unfortunately, Aprilia stopped production of these back in 2010, but at the time, this was the trickest of the trick when it came to Supermotos. And 14 years later, these bikes still look trick. And what's cool about this Aprilia is it was actually a twin cylinder. I mean, man, what could have been if they would have just stayed with this motorcycle? Anyway, this is a great looking bike with an incredible amount of performance, and I've seen a few of these laying around in the used market for under $7,000. KTM also has a 640 LC4 that you might be able to find, and as you can see, KTM loves their Sumos, and this is a great option to consider if the price is right. Also, let's call this one a little bit on the borderline with Supermoto, the 2008 to 2010 Duke 690. I actually really liked this bike and wanted one at one time. It looks like a Supermoto in a street bike's body. These were very nice bikes, and if you can find one used, I'm sure the fun factor is very high on them. Again, it also comes down to price. Now, I also mentioned earlier the Husqvarna TE510 when I was talking about the SWM. This is another great bike, but of course the question is finding one in good shape at a fair price. Now, probably your best option in used pre-built Supermotos is if you can somehow get your hands on the Yamaha WR series. They made a 250 that was street legal at one time, and these were really great bikes. And just like so many manufacturers, it's just unfortunate that the Yamaha decided to stop building these. Now, what else is cool about the WR series is there's a lot of people that converted these WRs, or at least the older ones, to street legal versions. So they were non-street legal, and depending on what state they were in, were able to get them plated. Now, if you could find something like that, I would consider that to be a serious score, because those bikes are bred more off of a race engine versus a street engine. So if you dig around a little bit, maybe you have to do a little bit of traveling, but if there's somehow you can get your hands on one of these WRs, consider yourself lucky. Now we can finally start talking about the best platforms to build a Supermoto. Maybe you can find one of these in the used market that you can justify the price and then upgrading, which normally costs about $2,000 to convert into a Supermoto. Or maybe you already own one of these bikes and you can convert it. The best place to start with the best technology is in the premium dual sport market. Fortunately, manufacturers have continued to develop high-end dual sports. High-end dual sports like the Honda CR450RL or even RX versions, which is not street legal. You have the KTM 500 and 350, which is also the Husqvarna 501 and 350, and even Beta makes like a 430RR and 350. Now, these make excellent supermotos because they are very powerful, they're street legal, and they're also lower in weight than the 690 SMC from KTM. Now, most racers of supermoto use a 450 to 500cc platform, so these are highly effective in terms of performance and handling. But the drawback of these bikes, obviously, is their price. These dual sports brand new will run anywhere from $11,000 to $13,000 United States dollars, which is well worth it. But then you're going to need to spend an additional $2,000 at least to convert it into a supermoto. That's why I think it's better for most people to just start out on the 690 or the 701. You're just better off that way. Now, the only way I would really consider doing this is if you wanted to ride dual sport as well as supermoto. Then you could just ride the trails, ride your dual sport, and then whenever you wanted to, just toss on your supermoto wheels and go. In fact, that's a pretty awesome way to live your life. I actually chose that route with my Honda CR450RL. Now, if you're only interested in street and you don't ever want to touch the trails, again, go with the 690 or 701 platform. It's just better. But if you already have one of these high-end dual sports, or you're just in the mood to build one badass race-style street bike, these are hella good platforms to start out with. Now, this brings me into the handful of cheaper, lower-cost dual sports available, like the XR650L, the 300L from Honda. DRZ also makes a 650 trail bike thumper, the older WR250s and 450s that I mentioned before. Now, I'm sure there's a lot more that I'm leaving out for this conversation, but I want to look at these, especially like the XR650L. This was an old-school, popular supermoto conversion bike when I used to race them, and they had this open class. The thing about this Honda is it can be found all over the place in the used market for very cheap. And a lot like the Suzuki DRZ, they haven't changed much when it came to this XR650L. And also because it was once used widely as a supermoto conversion bike, you can still find a lot of used supermoto kits out there on eBay and other online sites that make this a very low-cost bike to get started with. And they have an incredible amount of power even though their technology is old. These are just good, all-around reliable dual sports at very low price points that will free up your budget for any kind of other accessories and upgrades that you might want to add to your bike. The point is, whether you choose to buy a pre-built supermoto or build one of your own, the truth is anybody with any budget and any skill level can get started supermotoing. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner or a pro, if you're broke or you're rich, supermoto is for all of us. There is no such thing as a boring supermoto bike. I mean, even a scooter with slicks on it is dope. All you need to do is just get one and go. Time's a-wasting. Well, goons and gals, that's about all I have to say for today. And as always, I thank you so very much for listening and watching this video today. Do me a favor and put your comments and suggestions down there in the comment box. And until the next time, remember that everything I said in this video is just my opinion only, and I could be wrong.